Hey folks, it's Steve. This is the next continuation of my video diary on making Live Fearlessly. Sorry, it's been a little while. I had a road trip there back to the Midwest and really haven't had time to do it, and it just took me a few days. When I got back here, I had gigs like 2 or 3 days in a row, and I was just kind of tired, so I took a little bit of time off from at least filming it. But I've been working along on this record. Really excited about it. When last I left you, I was talking about a song called Bring Back the 70's, and I have all the basic tracks done on that. The only thing I've got to do now is put a lead vocal on it and have the guitar parts put on, and I'm really excited. I'm not going to make a formal announcement about that yet, but I'm about to ink a deal with a very, very talented guitar player who's going to be doing all the guitar work on this album, and ooh, I'm excited by it. So I'll talk more about that in a future installment. But Bring Back the 70's, interesting tune. I'm not going to do a full performance of it in this. I just want to talk a little bit about how it was made, and then I'll do like an actual performance video another time. It was a song that was kind of inspired by the notion of I loved the radio when I was growing up. Absolutely adored it. I listened to it all the time. Loved being in the car because the radio could be on. And there were 2 or 3 stations, even in the little podunk place I came from, Ogallala, Nebraska. For those of you from Ogallala, Nebraska, I am not insulting it by calling it podunk, so, you know, drop your indignation. I love that place. There were like 2 or 3 stations that we could pick up, and they all played great music, and it was because I grew up in the early 80s, and I loved 80s music. But what I realized is that part of the reason I loved the radio so much was that the 70s had just happened, and so it was still very much a presence on radio. And as I've grown older, I've become kind of a music historian in a way, and I just have found, my God, I love the 70s. I mean, everyone says the 60s is the greatest era, and I know why they say that. It was a time of great experimentation and all kinds of things were learned, but for me, the problem with the 60s was they hadn't really learned how to make good recordings yet. They had antiquated equipment, and I know I'm going to get blasted for that statement, but I don't care. They had kind of mastered a lot of, you know, modern recording techniques by the 70s, and they still had this huge diversity of different things happening in the radio. And also the radio wasn't overly formatted until the later 70s and the 80s, you know, on a wide, broad scale. So, you know, my God, you'd turn on the radio in the 70s and you'd hear a country song, and then you'd hear a hard rock song, and then you'd hear Barry Manilow, and then you'd hear Chicago, and I mean, it was like anything that had broad appeal could get played, and it just all made it onto the Billboard Hot 100, whereas now it's like the Billboard Hot 100 is very much kind of that pop sound, and then there's a mainstream rock chart that rock songs make it on, and then there's the country charts, and there's the adult contemporary charts, and radio stations have kind of gotten pigeonholed into playing one of those formats, and I'm not necessarily trashing that. I don't know that it's been a great thing for music, but I also know that, you know, radio stations have to be in business in order to do what they do, and it's a lot easier to sell advertising when you are really formatted, because then you've got a target listener, and then your advertisers that want that particular demographic are more willing to spend money. So, you know, that is it's a consideration that has to exist. You know, I'm a businessman too, so I understand all that, but it hasn't necessarily been great for creativity. And so in those days, it just was sort of a free-for-all. And what I realized was that I wanted to write some kind of a song that paid tribute to not just the music of the 70s, but also how much I loved listening to the radio in the era that the 70s was so influential in. So I started putting it together, and it was just a lot of fun. I started out by writing a laundry list of all of the artists and bands that I love, from that era, and tried to cover everyone that was really important to me anyway, and then as many other things as I could that I thought. And I wanted to talk about the different kinds of music that happened. So, for instance, country rock was a big deal. People like the Eagles, Leonard Skinner, the Allman Brothers. Just there was a very, especially in the early to mid 70s, very, very kind of country influenced. It wasn't really country music, it was just rock music that had a lot of country flavor in it. Elton John made some records like that. The Tumbleweed Connection album is loaded with that kind of stuff. Billy Joel's Piano Man album and Street Life Serenade album have a lot of country instrumentation and influences in the way that the records are put together. Just, I think they called it the California sound, which cracks me up because no one in California these days is associated much with country music, but that's kind of what it was. Rick Nelson with stuff like Garden Party, you know. I went to a garden party, reminisced with my old friends, played and play those songs again. I mean, just a bunch of people. Crosby, Stills, and Nash with Teach Your Children Well, you know. When you're on the road, don't ever go, you know, that you can live by. So there's just a bunch of that. So country rock was important to touch on for me. Disco we talk a little bit about, because how can you talk about the 70s without the disco craze? Country music, the outlaw movement was a big deal. So what I thought was kind of interesting when you think about it is that rock went through this phase where there was a lot of country elements, but then some people started to rise up through the ranks in country music who had rock influences, like Hank Williams Jr. and Waylon Jennings. A lot of people don't know about Waylon Jennings, that he was actually in Buddy Holly's band on the last tour when Buddy was killed in that plane accident. In fact, Waylon was supposed to be on the plane. He gave up his ticket to the Big Bopper because the Big Bopper was really sick, and asked Waylon if he could have his seat so that he could get to the hotel in time to get a little bit of sleep and try and heal up a little for the next show. So Waylon gave him his seat, otherwise Waylon would have gone down in that plane and we never would have had the Waylon Jennings that we all know. Felt so guilty about that, he kind of abandoned the music scene for almost a decade. Then he came back in the late 60s and, you know, the rest is history. But the outlaw movement in country was a big deal with stuff like long time forgotten, the dreams that just fell by the way. Good life he promised ain't what she's living today. You know, and the way Waylon played guitar was much harder edged, more rock influenced than anybody had been in Nashville at that point. So that was another thing I wanted to touch on. Singer-songwriter movement, very close to my heart. That's what I am. If I went back to the 70s in time, I'm sure that I would have gone to LA and tried to be a singer-songwriter. Billy Joel, Jim Croce, James Taylor, Joni Mitchell, Cat Stevens, Harry Chapin. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. It was the era of singer-songwriters. Wanted to talk about that. Of course, Billy and Elton, the two greatest piano men in rock and roll history, in my opinion. Now, people say, you think they're the greatest players? I don't know. That's subjective. But there's no doubt in my mind that the only two other people, maybe two or three other names that are even come close to making the impact that they have on piano players as actual lead singer, frontmen, you know, massive cultural sensations, might be Jerry Lee Lewis, Little Richard, and Ray Charles. None of which approach the level of success that Billy Joel and Elton John have enjoyed. So, I mean, I think Billy and Elton are standing on those guys' shoulders, and they both might tell me that, well, we have a lot more respect for them than you should have for us, because that's how they are. But those guys really made a significant contribution to piano playing, and they came up kind of the heart of their career was in the 70s. So I talk about that. Chicago with the brass, Chicago Blood, Sweat, and Tears, jazz, rock, fusion kind of stuff. I mean, so there's a lot of different stuff. And then there was also the punk movement, which I'm not a big fan of punk music, but it is part of the 70s legacy where rock and roll got to the point where a lot of people felt like it was too philosophical, too soft, too deep, too serious, which I love that stuff. So I disagreed with their premise, but they created the punk movement basically to try to get rock and roll back to its roots of sort of rebellion and riot and attitude. And of course then there was the funk movement, which played heavily into the dance music era and the disco craze eventually, and that was pioneered by guys like George Clinton, you know. So it was, I wanted to talk about all those different things, and that's kind of what we did. And the chorus says, well, could somebody please bring back the 70s, where country rock and disco were my friends? Yeah, could somebody please bring back the 70s? I want to love my radio again. And that's kind of what it is, because I don't particularly enjoy the radio that much anymore. You know, there's not enough variety, and they get into these damn playlists where they have like 30 or 40 songs, and that's all you hear, and they don't really have any other, you know, that seldom do you hear anything else. And it doesn't matter if you're on a satellite or just a regular broadcast station. They all kind of get into their little formats, and so, you know, it's okay, but it is what it is. But that's what that song was written about. As far as the structure on it, I actually went to the 80s for the piano part. I came up with this thing. You remember the song by Toto, Rosanna? And it's got this kind of feel like, all I wanna do is da 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 da. Rosanna, Rosanna, da 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 da. Rosanna. Here, I'll even back this up a little bit so you can see my hands better. I'm not gonna try and teach it or anything right now, but yeah, it's this. So I'm kind of doing that toggle technique I always talk about. Bottom, bottom, bum, bottom, bottom. And under here I'm just going bum, 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 bum. So I thought that would be kind of a fun rhythm pattern basis for this. And put a drum beat under it, and I came up with this bass line. It's like bum 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 bum, and put a rock beat over it. And then we do a key change in the middle, which is kind of fun. We start out in the key of E, and I'm proud of this key change. I find a way to modulate up a tritone for the bridge, so we go from E to B flat. So we're like, and then we've got a little break in there where I just put a little bit of a piano ditty, something like, and one final key change, we end up in the key of G. So here's kind of what the track sounds like right now. Again, there's no vocal, and I'll do an actual performance on it, but this is just kind of what and this is not a final mix down by any means, but this is drums, bass, and piano. I haven't added guitar or vocal yet, but it gives you some idea of where we're at. Here's the piano. There's the bass. So what's happening with that's kind of fun. I've got kind of a swing beat going on the hi-hat. Okay. And underneath it, I've got boom, 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 boom. It gives it kind of this trotty thing. When you put that bass under it, round it out. John Denver had us high on a mountain, clapped and taught us how to play guitar. Crosby, Stills, and Nash showed us that 3 was still enough, and Elvis proved that he was still a star. Well, could somebody please bring back the 70s, when country, rock, and disco were my friends? Well, could somebody please bring back the 70s? I wanna love my radio again. Anyway, that's kind of where the song's going. Like I say, once I have a finished product, I'll definitely post a performance video of the whole thing, but I wanted to bring you up to speed on where I'm at with that. My next diary, I'll actually talk about the next song that I've already got the basic track done for. So, thank you very much. I'm out of here, and remember, if you're not having fun when you're making music, you're doing it wrong. Take care, guys.